Okay, let's talk about the German coast uprising of 1811, but first, we've got to set the stage. In 1760, the French claimed Louisiana for their own and put Jean-Baptiste de Bienville in charge of creating a new colony in the new territory. And in 1718, the city of New Orleans was founded. In 1721, royal engineer Adrien de Paget laid the streets for New Orleans. He named them after Catholic saints and royal French houses. For example, Bourbon Street was named after the French royal house of Bourbon. In 1763, after the 7 Years' War, the city of New Orleans was seceded to Spain. At the time, all the buildings in New Orleans were French, so they were made of wood. Well, there was a fire in 1788 and again in 94, and everything just about burned down. Well, the Spanish didn't like that, so they decided to put stucco on the outside of these French buildings to prevent it from burning. In 1803, the French got Louisiana back from Spain and 20 days later sold it to America, and Americans came to Louisiana. After the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, many English-speaking Americans began moving into the new territory, specifically New Orleans, and when they got there, they ran into the Creoles. Now, the Creoles viewed these English-speaking American newcomers as rude, brutish, uncultured, and ill-mannered, while the Americans viewed the French as frivolous, dainty, idolatrous, and effeminate. Now, they ain't like each other, and saying that is an understatement. They hated each other so much that they set up different living quarters. So the Americans set up shop on one side of Canal Street in Faubourg St. Mary, while the Creoles set up shop in the other, and the Americans called the Creole side the French Quarter. Now, Canal Street separates these two quarters, and it was used as a meeting place where you could do business in both English and French. And the median down the middle of Canal Street is where we get the term neutral ground. And while all of that was going on, Haiti was fighting for its independence and sending people to Louisiana. Fast forward to December of 1810, and the Americans and Creoles are still butting heads down in New Orleans. But upriver on the German coast, something else is going down. Now, if you've ever been to Louisiana in December, you know good and well we got celebrations going on out the wazoo. And while white people were working out the logistics for these celebrations, they weren't paying attention to the enslaved population. You see, every Sunday they had dances in the Congo Square, and the white people were not paying attention to the enslaved men speaking to one another in hushed voices. Which brings us to a man named Charles Delon. Now, Charles was a biracial man whose father was white and his mother was black. He was also a slave driver on the Woodland plantation, meaning he was a cracker, anyone who cracked the whip to keep the enslaved in line. This made him responsible for daily tasks, and he reported directly to Manuel Andre, the master of the Woodland plantation. He was Andre's lapdog, but what he did next surprised everyone. Now, Charles Delon was a cruel cracker. He would beat the flesh off your bones, and because of his light skin, he was given preferential treatment. But secretly, he hated what the white people forced him to do to his people. He hated every part of it. And this deep-seated hatred forced him to find ways to fight back. And while he was trying to find ways to get even with the white upper class, he was introduced to two enslaved African men fresh off the boat from West Africa. Their names were Cook and Kamanen. They were from the Akan Kingdom and survived the Middle Passage. Let me know if you want a video on the Middle Passage. Now, these two men were warriors from the Akan Kingdom, and they had ritualistic scars across their faces. Now, when Charles met these two men, he told them about how 20 years earlier, Haiti revolted against their masters and created an independent black state. And together, these men put plans in place to do the same in Louisiana. Ooh, this is interesting. It's now the first week of January in 1811, and it's been raining all year. There was floods and mud and so much rain that no field work could be done. Since there was no work to be done in the fields because of the rain, the enslaved population began to talk amongst themselves. Whispers and hushed words went from plantation to plantation, spreading the word of what was about to happen. Then on January 8th, just 2 days after Twelfth Night, the word was given, and the fight for freedom was about to go down. Now, this date was no accident. It was a result of African militaristic design and French politics. You see, Governor Claiborne took all the troops out of New Orleans and moved them to Baton Rouge to ensure the annexation of Spanish West Florida, leaving New Orleans defenseless. And on the night of the 8th, Delon and 25 other enslaved Africans crept into the big house with axes and cane knives to do the unthinkable. Once inside the big house, Charles DeLong led them directly to Manuel Andry's bedroom. He awoke to find himself surrounded by 25 enslaved Africans with murder in their eyes. Manuel Andry jumped out of bed so fast and ran through his attackers they couldn't catch him. But his son Gilbert wasn't so lucky. While his son was being hacked to pieces, Manuel Andry made it to the river where he found a rickety canoe, and he crossed over to the west bank and ran into the house of a plantation owner and told them that his slaves had revolted. And while he was doing that, the enslaved raided his house for weapons and uniforms. At that very moment, they became an army with a political goal. And with that, they marched downriver towards New Orleans yelling, "On to New Orleans! And freedom or death!" And as they marched downriver, they picked up more and more enslaved Africans, and their numbers grew. Almost 24 hours later, Charles DeLong led an army of over 500 enslaved Africans. And word spread fast. Yeah, them white people found out all the Negroes was coming. They left their plantations and their homes so quickly, they got out of there. But everybody ain't leave. You know there always one. His name was Francois Trepanier. Now, Trepanier was one of the worst of the worst. He was such an evil man that he kept an enslaved boy as a pet, like you would a dog on a leash and everything. That old evil decrepit bastard sat there with his shotgun and waited on the militia to show up. Now, once he saw the army getting close to his property, he started shooting, but a shotgun ain't gonna do too much from a great distance. So Cook, who saw what was going on, went around the plantation, went through the back door, and walked out the front door and killed this man dead as he sat on his porch. Now, while Cook was burying his axe in Trepanier's skull, the white people done made it down to New Orleans, and they was telling everybody what was going on, had the whole city freaking out. Their horror stories and white tears whipped Governor Claiborne into a frenzy, so much so that he instituted a 6 p.m. curfew for black men in the city of New Orleans. Man, y'all, Governor Claiborne was so scared he did the unthinkable. He shut down all the bars and clubs in New Orleans, told them people, you ain't gotta go home, but you got to get the hell up out of here. After doing that, he got himself together and rounded up a bunch of men, formed a militia, and went after the enslaved Africans. But he was outnumbered. He had 100 men who was getting ready to go up against these 500 Africans. It was General Wade Hampton who marched these 100 or so men into battle. And along the way, they picked up some more white men and their numbers increased. Now, after dark, both sides met at the Kenner Henderson plantation, which now is where the airport is. Now it's nighttime, and the army of 500 or so enslaved Africans camped out at the Kenner Henderson plantation for the night. And while they were camped out, Wade Hampton's army came in from the other side, getting ready to attack. And when Wade gave the order to attack, they found the encampment was already empty. They had fallen for a West African ruse. You see, Cook and Kumanen had been fighting the British and the Portuguese in West Africa for a while before they were captured and brought to America. And realizing Wade and them had better weapons, they left their encampment to lure the Americans into a spot where they could win. So while the enslaved retreated to find higher ground, something happened across the river that just blew everything to pieces. You see, they forgot about Manuel Andry. And with the help of Charles Perret, Manuel was able to get about 80 plantation owners to form a militia, get their weapons, and cross the river. It's the morning of January 10th, 1811, and the plantation owners have now crossed the river and ended up just behind the army of enslaved Africans near the Bernardine plantation. This moment was a tipping point in world history. If the enslaved won, well, that would be the end of the white ruling class in Louisiana. And if the white planters won, well, we'd end up where we are today. Suddenly, African war drums began to beat in the fields. You could hear it for miles and miles. The white planters advanced, firing their bullets into the bodies of black men simply fighting for their freedom. Now, we don't know the specifics of the fight, but we do know they fought in the rain. Shortly after the battle began, the enslaved were out of ammunition, and the white plantation owners took no mercy. After that, the lines broke, and the enslaved ran north to find refuge in the swamps, while the others got slaughtered. They slaughtered every black person they saw. It's the morning of January 10th, 1811, and the plantation owners have now crossed the river and ended up just behind the army of enslaved Africans near the Bernardine plantation. This moment was a tipping point in world history. If the enslaved won, well, that would be the end of the white ruling class in Louisiana. And if the white planters won, well, we'd end up where we are today. Suddenly, African war drums began to beat in the fields. You could hear it for miles and miles. The white planters advanced, firing their bullets into the bodies of black men simply fighting for their freedom. Now, we don't know the specifics of the fight, but we do know they fought in the rain. Shortly after the battle began, the enslaved were out of ammunition, and the white plantation owners took no mercy. After that, the lines broke, and the enslaved ran north to find refuge in the swamps, while the others got slaughtered. They slaughtered every black person they saw. It's important to remember that during their fight for freedom, the enslaved only killed 2 people, whereas the white people killed all the black people they could and only took 25 prisoners, including Cook and Quamano. They then combed the swamps with dogs looking for anyone who escaped. And after 2 days of searching, they finally found Charles Delon. And as revenge for his son's death, Manuel Audrey had Charles Delon's arms cut off, shot him several times, and then had him roasted over an open fire. Now, Cook, Quamano, and the others were tried in court. During the trial, Cook was asked if he killed Francois Trepanier with an axe, and he said yes. As punishment, he and 100 other enslaved Africans were decapitated. Their heads were placed on pikes for 40 miles along River Road, all the way down to the Place d'Armes in the heart of the French Quarter. Savages. Sadly, that's not the end of the story. You see, white legislators used the uprising as a way to leverage power in the area. Governor Claiborne wrote the president and asked for a permanent garrison to be stationed in New Orleans to prevent this from happening again. He also used them to exert his will over the people. 1 year later, in 1812, Louisiana became a state. And in 1815, Andrew Jackson won the Battle of New Orleans. Now, even though New Orleans was still very much French, it had officially become an American city at this point in history. New Orleans then went on to become one of the most powerful ports in the South, as well as the largest slave port in the country. Now, here's how the South rewrote history. They portray Charles Delon as a murderous savage who got what he deserved, while the white plantation owners were glorified and had streets named after them, like Claiborne. The town of Kenner is named after another plantation owner. So are Harvey, Chalmette, and Mandeville, just to name a few. These same people who roasted a man alive and decapitated hundreds are now glorified with street names and towns and cities named after them, while the men who fought for their freedom were called savages. And that's the end of the 1811 German Coast Uprising.